number of people joining has slowed down. And Craig, before we get official, I should let you know that I sent the meeting invite to a few people around here.
No problem.
Okay, all right, I will go ahead. It's 2:01. I will go ahead and get started. Welcome subcommittee members and members of the public to the March 6, 2024 Governor's Workforce Development Board Strategic Planning Subcommittee meeting. For the record, my name is Nancy Olson. I am the chair of the Strategic Planning Subcommittee. Katie, will you please take roll call and confirm a quorum and verify posting?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so for roll, we have Chair Olson.
Here.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Stepona.
Here.
Thank you. Drazen Ellis.
Present.
Thank you. Brett Miller.
Present.
Thank you. Milt Stewart.
Here.
Thank you. Senator Lang. And Michael Yoder.
Here.
Thank you. And then Chair, for the voting members, we had one pre-notified absence for Michael Bolgnini. And then for our non-voting members, we have David Schmidt.
Here.
Thank you. Sherry Mantanona. Robert Fink.
Here.
Thank you. Dr. Tiffany Tyler Gardner.
Present.
Thank you. And Ariana Florence. Okay. All right. And with that, Ms. Chair, Katie Gilbertson, Governor's Office of Workforce Innovation, for the record. I hereby affirm that this March 6, 2024 Governor's Workforce Development Board Strategic Planning Subcommittee meeting has reached a quorum. And further, from the agenda and notice for this meeting were properly posted pursuant to Nevada's open meeting law, NRS 241020.
Thank you, Katie. Before we proceed, I would kindly request that anyone who speaks today identify yourself for the record. Continuing on to agenda item number 4, public comments. Members of the public are invited to provide comments at this time. No action may be taken on any matters during public comments until the matter itself has been included on an agenda as an item for possible action. Do we have any public comments on the telephone? Any public comments on Zoom? Moving on to agenda item number 5. Is there any discussion before I call for a motion to approve the December 6, 2023 Strategic Planning Subcommittee meeting minutes? Hearing no further discussion, I call for a motion to approve the December 6, 2023 Strategic Planning Subcommittee meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
This is Danielle Monroe Moreno. I have a motion. Move the motion.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Brett Miller, I second the motion.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Please let the record reflect that the motion carries. Moving on to agenda item number 6 for discussion and informational item only. The chair will provide an update on the WIO estate plan. So Nancy Olson, for the record, the WIO estate plan was submitted yesterday morning, or no, Monday morning, excuse me, this is Wednesday. The due date, March 4th. It would have actually been submitted a little bit earlier, on Friday the 1st, but there were some technical difficulties that Katie Gilbertson was working with the feds to, think it's the Department of Education in this case, to correct before it could actually be submitted. So the good news is that it was submitted following approval by the full Governor's Workforce Development Board. All parts of the plan were submitted, and now it goes through the federal review from the Department of Labor and the Department of Education. It is fairly common for them to come back and ask for additional information in areas or clarification in areas. It is especially likely this year because of two things, in my humble opinion. One is that we did make quite a few changes and tried to do a little streamlining with the state plan. And two, the guidance from the Department of Labor and US Department of Education came out, as is normal, very, very late. So we were responding to that guidance kind of at the last minute in completing the work on the state plan. So I think those two things could lead to pieces from the US Department of Education and Department of Labor for us to address prior to their approval. They have 90 days to either provide us with feedback or approve the plan. If they do not provide us with that feedback within that time frame, then the plan is considered approved. They can also do a conditional approval while we do any kind of changes that they want. So the last time I believe the wording was substantially approvable. However, there were required changes. So by 90 days from this last Monday, we should have feedback. The main thing is that we have to have an approved plan prior to July 1. So, and any questions on that process or the steps that were taken? And I want to congratulate Katie Gilbertson on all the hard work that takes place in putting the state plan into the portal, as well as all the rest of the work that she did coordinating all the efforts and presenting information to the full board. The portal does not make it easy to put the information in, and it doesn't make it pretty either. So I do want to congratulate her on that. And I also want to congratulate many of you in this meeting that participated in the development and the revision of the plan. So thank you so much for all your hard work. We could not have done it without you. So if there are no further discussion or questions, I will move on to the next agenda item. And I see comment in the chat from Janice that she just says ditto from Dieter. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 7. For discussion and information item only, the chair recognizes Katie Gilbertson, policy analyst at Owen or Gowen, depending on Katie, which one are we supposed to use now?
Yeah, right now it's Owen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay. So Katie will provide an update on the Governor's Workforce Development Strategic Plan.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Chair. Thank you for the appreciation. It was hard to put all that in the portal, but no, I appreciate everybody's work over the past year for that WIOA state plan. So the strategic plan that I'm going to talk briefly about is derived from the goals and strategies and measurements of the WIOA state plan, and it's going to be a more tangible and feasible kind of working document, more for the Governor's Workforce Development Board to use as a playbook for their strategic implementation of the WIOA state plan. So similar, but a little bit shorter and a little bit more agile to be flexible and stuff like that. So the way this came about is Chair Anderson and Vice Chair Evans identified 5 members to create a GWDB strategic plan task force. And so they are meeting, they met for the first time on February 23rd, going to meet again next Tuesday. So these are just meetings that we take the goals and strategies and measurements from the WIOA state plan, and we just mark them up and we add things and stuff like that. So we don't have anything yet to show you. The kind of timeline that we're working on right now is that we want to have a initial draft completed by March 18th, the week of March 18th. Then we're going to do a pretty big stakeholder engagement process with like workforce adjacent partners like economic development, chambers, different various state agencies as well, and also the title agencies to make sure that this works for them. And so we're going to do that stakeholder engagement process until about the end of April. Then we're going to have the plan ready for the executive committee to review at their May 13th meeting. Then we actually have another subcommittee for this group on June 6th. So you guys will get to see the strategic plan. And then finally, we're going to take it to the full board on June 12th to be approved. And then we're going to start kind of like the implementation process of it all. But that's basically the gist of it. We don't have anything to show you yet. It's just a little teaser, but I think it will be a little bit easier to digest and for the board to work with. And I don't know if Edward, do you want to say anything? Because you're on this task force.
It will be a lot easier to digest because it's going to be really, really tiny.
Yeah. So yeah, that's
Not 200 plus pages. It's
Yeah.
real tiny. Something we could all just go, "Oop, there it is. Good. We're good."
it's not going to the feds either, which I know that was something that was brought up in this group of not making our goal super specific, because of the federal oversight on that. So this one's not going to the feds. This is just more for the board's use. So it has a lot more of that flexibility, like I said earlier.
Okay, Nancy Olson for the record. Thank you, Katie. Is there any further discussion or questions for Katie before I move to the next agenda item? Okay, moving on to agenda item number 8 for discussion and informational item only. The chair recognizes Craig Stutuki, Director of the Office of Career Readiness, Adult Learning and Education Options. Oh, yeah. Katie says outcomes, so it threw me. At the Nevada Department of Education to present on the Perkins 5 state plan revision.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is everybody able to see my screen okay? I see Edward's head
Yes.
nodding, so we'll say yes. Perfect. Thank you. So good afternoon, Chair, members of the subcommittee, and members of the public. For the record, I am Craig Stutuki. I serve as the Director of the Office of Career Readiness, Adult Learning and Education Options at the Nevada Department of Education. I appreciate the subcommittee's time today to provide an update on the Perkins 5 state plan revision that the department is currently undergoing. Today, I'll provide an overview of Perkins 5, where we're at in our revision process, which is almost the finish line. I know that Nancy and Katie were super happy when they were done. I'm getting close to that point in time as well. Discussion on revised Perkins 5 strategic goals, and then the identified Perkins 5 performance targets, also known as the state determined performance levels, or you may see throughout the presentation, SDPLs. For those of you who aren't familiar with Perkins 5, Perkins 5 is the federal funding for career and technical education that's for eligible secondary and post-secondary education agencies Right now, we have 14 school districts, 3 charter schools, and all 4 community colleges that are eligible subrecipients. Secondary allocations are based on a formula that includes the county population of 5 to 17-year-olds, and then also the number of 5 to 17-year-olds who are currently living in poverty. Post-secondary allocations are based on Pell Grant numbers at each of the community colleges. Included in our state leadership funding are funds specifically dedicated to juvenile justice facilities, non-traditional training and employment, and special populations recruitment. Additionally, to the $12.8 million from the U.S. Department of Education, we are also allocated funds from the state general fund for the administrative match of that funding. For last fiscal year, so school year 23-24, or excuse me, 22-23, we had over 76,000 students enrolled in a career technical education course at the secondary level, and over 25,800 students enrolled at one of the 4 post-secondary institutions. When I say post-secondary, just so I'm clear, for the subcommittee, when we use post-secondary and Perkins 5, we're talking about the 4 community colleges. We are not including the 3 universities. As part of Perkins 5, we have significant reported requirements on enrollment and achievement. Not only does the department report on state-determined performance levels, but we report for each student population group and each of those student population groups across all 16 career clusters for each of those performance levels. Special population students include students with disabilities, students from economically disadvantaged families, students preparing for non-traditional career fields, single parents, out-of-workforce individuals, English learners, homeless individuals, youth in foster care, and students with a parent in active military. So those are, when we consider special populations, those are the subgroups that we are discussing. A lot of students and a lot of educators think when we're talking about special populations that we're really only focused on students with disabilities or English language learners, but it's a much larger subset of our student population that we are accounting for with special populations. We have 7 secondary indicators and 3 post-secondary indicators, and I'm going to get to that later in the presentation. And then also when we report federally, we report on what we call concentrator level data, which at the secondary level is a student who has been in the same CTE program of study for two years. That's the definition of a concentrator. At the post-secondary level, it's a student who's been in 12 post-secondary credits. That is considered a concentrator. So we may have students who are starting their CTE pathway. Those students are not counted in our performance levels until that point in time when they become a concentrator. So that's how we are reporting our data federally to the U.S. Department of Education. In terms of revision process, we have actually completed our public input and plan development. We started, I think, in June or July with stakeholder meetings and went all the way through December. I think our last one was the first week in December in Churchill County, but I did a roadshow across the state, visiting multiple counties, and we had some great engagement with school districts and post-secondary institutions and workforce, and we saw some great examples across the state of how those 3 groups are working together to make sure that students are successful in their career pathways. The revised state plan is scheduled for approval by the State Board of Education later this month on March 27th, and then will be submitted to Governor Lombardo by April 10th for his review. We are required to submit that revised state plan to the U.S. Department of Education by May 10th. Some of you were probably part of the original presentation I think I did in August to the Governor's Workforce Development Board. As I mentioned, in our current state plan, we have 35 strategic goals in our current state plan. And as I mentioned then, when you have 35 goals, it's very hard to focus on anything because you're focused on everything. And so one of the things that we did, and as we heard from stakeholders, was like really trying to find ways to focus on the 3 big buckets. I know as you worked on the WEO estate plan, you were really kind of looking at some broad areas, and we were as well. Our State Board of Education likes to see measurable goals in terms of our strategic goals. And so when you see those in a little bit, you're going to see some SMART goals. I won't say smart, but smart-ish, I guess, because we were a little vague because We already have performance indicators that we have to report to the feds, and so we did not want to turn our strategic goals into additional performance things that we would have to report federally. So our stakeholders really helped us narrow down into these 3 goals that we're going to talk about here shortly. The first strategic goal really focuses on improving access and achievement to high quality CTE. And I do realize I threw all kinds of text on here for you to read. But one of the things that we did in the Perkins plan, it was really define what high skill, high wage, and in-demand occupations were. Our office appreciates the collaboration of Owen and particularly Katie Gilbertson and also Nancy Olson from the Department's Adult Education team to help really work on what these definitions are over the course of my 4 years at the department, and also as we were reaching out to stakeholders through this process, we really had people raise concerns about what is a high skill occupation or a high demand occupation, and really, as educators, we like definitions. And so one of the things that we really wanted to try and do was implement some definitions. And so with some collaboration with Goen and also with Nancy, we kind of came up with these three definitions for high skill, high wage, and demand. So that when our school districts are considering utilizing their Perkins funding for specific CTE programs or even our post-secondary institutions, they clearly know, like what we're talking about in terms of what high wage is, high skill, and demand. We are also able, working with other states that already had these definitions, and we kind of massage some of that language a little bit to be a little bit in line with what we do in Nevada. The high quality definition for secondary was already included in the existing Perkins 5 state plan, but I just added what's included in that for your information. As we work to ensure a seamless transition from secondary to post-secondary and or workforce, it's really important that we have definitions that these terms are applicable statewide. And that was one of the things that we had kind of seen through is in some cases, every school district was interpreting high skill, high wage, and demand slightly differently, even when potentially our data wasn't necessarily indicating that as a whole. Our second goal focuses more on a systematic approach to career pathways and skill development. Over the past 3 years, the department has done a significant revision to its secondary CTE programs of study, including the reduction of over 20 programs of study at the secondary level that were either duplicative or no longer aligned to Nevada's economic needs. We also restructured those programs of study so students had more opportunities to earn post-secondary level credits, earn recognized post-secondary credentials, and participate in work-based learning. This restructuring has allowed the department to create some additional performance indicators for Perkins 5 in the revised proposed Perkins 5 state plan, and I'll go over that in just a couple minutes. Additionally, as part of this plan, and really working on transition, is that we have included a condition in our state plan that if a secondary school district misses the performance target for attained post-secondary credits, that the respective community college is part of the required improvement plan. One of the things that we really wanted to show is that it is a partnership between secondary and post-secondary and also the workforce as a whole. But one of the things that we had been hearing throughout the plan is that when you look at attained post-secondary credits, as you'll see in just a couple of minutes, it's a secondary indicator only. As post-secondary, I guess in the reporting world, is not necessarily accountable for that piece. And so our secondary school districts were concerned that they were being held solely accountable for an indicator that they didn't have full control over. In order to offer post-secondary credits, you have to have a partner and find ways to work together. And so that was a condition that we added based on stakeholder feedback as we went through. And really, if it gets to an implementation stage where a school district misses a performance target, it will really be the Department of Education who is convening that group to develop a plan to improve those targets. We're not having that school district and a community college working together trying to figure it out. We're actually going to come in and kind of be the facilitator of those discussions to help facilitate and move the needle. Our third strategic goal is pretty similar to what was already in the state plan. It's to ensure that our employers have a pipeline of skilled talent. I think I mentioned in the original presentation that in the current state plan, we have like 4 goals about ensuring pipeline talent. And really, at this point in time, whether you're in the public sector, you're in the private sector, we all have a need for a pipeline for skilled talent. And so instead of having multiple strategic objectives, we all need a pipeline of skilled talent. So we really just combined it into one. This also includes ensuring that we have a pipeline of CTE educators to support our secondary and post-secondary programs. And that was also one of the things that we heard throughout, was that it's very difficult for not only our secondary institutions, but our post-secondary institutions are struggling, making sure that they have teachers for these programs. When you're talking about high skill, high wage, and demand occupations, that are high wage, high skill, in demand for a reason, and people are choosing those options when potentially the school districts and the post-secondary institutions cannot match those salaries. So how do we help find ways to support those groups in developing their teacher pipeline? On the state determined performance indicators, as part of the Perkins 5 state plan, we are required by the U.S. Department of Education to set new determined performance levels. The requirements from the U.S. Department of Education was that we had to set a target that was above the average of the last 2 years of actual performance data that we have. And then we also had to compare that data to similar sized states to ensure that we are in alignment with states that have essentially similar funding levels at the federal level as us. In our case, we had to compare ourselves to 12 other states. Some of them were geographically close to us, like Idaho and Oregon, for example, but also some of them were not, like when you're talking about Iowa, Arkansas, and Connecticut. So we did have a wide range of states that we were comparing ourselves to. Additionally, as we were setting these targets, we reviewed our existing trends and our programmatic changes to determine what our base year 2024-25 is going to be and what our growth projections were going to be from there. So I tried to break overall these indicators into kind of like 3 categories. The first category, the academic indicators that are required for us to report to the U.S. Department of Education. For the academic proficiencies, I've also in this slide included the assessment that is used to measure those academic proficiencies. So if you look at the indicators, we have the 4-year graduation rate, which is pretty straightforward. Our academic proficiency in reading, language arts, and mathematics is based on the ACT exam, which is taken typically in the junior year. And then our science proficiency is based on the Nevada State Science Assessment, which in most districts is in the freshman year, but we do know that we have some districts that offer it in the sophomore year, depending on how they structure their science courses. So our actual target, or excuse me, our actual performance is in the second column for the last 2 reporting years. So if you take the 2021, 2022 reporting periods, that's the average of those 2. The 24-25 target, in most cases, we set slightly above that target. And then we based our growth on what we'd seen in growth since essentially 2018, 2019. But also as we get into the next set of indicators, we also kind of base that growth on a lot of programmatic change. So what you'll see with the academic ones is that we have what we believe achievable growth over the course of the 4 years based on historical trends on those assessments and based on our current performance levels. The second set of indicators are really focused on CTE program quality at the secondary level. For the revised state plan, we have now added 2 new indicators that we are going to be reporting starting in 24-25. One of them is 5S1, which is program quality recognized post-secondary credentials. Many of you may know that as industry recognized credential, but as it's written in Perkins 5 state plan, it's recognized post-secondary credential. The second indicator that we have added is work-based learning participation. One of the reasons, as we kind of like reviewed this process and reviewed the program quality and engaging with stakeholders, was that our initial state plan only focused on post-secondary credits. And post-secondary credits is not the only measurable outcome that our secondary CTE students are achieving and accomplishing in their programs. So we really wanted to measure the full spectrum of secondary outcomes for our CTE students so that we know that some programs are going to have more opportunities for work-based learning than they are post-secondary credits. We also know that some of them are going to have more opportunities to earn industry recognized credentials. And so we wanted to make sure that we were measuring the full spectrum of our student outcomes across all of our programs. So again, the second column has the average actual performance, and while 5S1 and 5S3 are new, we already were collecting data on these pieces. And so we already had existing data, which allowed us to kind of create a baseline and also start creating our growth. As you're going to notice, there are some significant growth goals after you get off of 24-25, and some of them are close to 5 to 7%. This is not only based on historical trends, but based on our predictions of student participation based on our revised programs of study. When we restructured our programs of study from 3-year sequences to 2-year sequences, we really provided districts with more flexibility to help students in their junior and senior year participate in essentially 5S1, 5S2, 5S3. And so those are the things that we, as we kind of restructured, we believe we're going to see some significant growth in these areas as we really focus in. One of the things that I want to kind of talk about in terms of 3S1, and one of the things that we've really been talking about is that post-program placement is really Nevada-based. Like that's post-program, how many students are going into the workforce in Nevada based on data that we get from NPower. Thank you again, going for that. And then also how many students are enrolling into an NG institution. We do not currently have the ability to track students who are leaving to go out of state on that piece. And so that post-program placement is really who's staying in Nevada for either post-secondary or workforce at this time. If you look kind of like 4S1 does have a significantly smaller growth compared to the rest of them. And one of the reasons for that is that Nevada is already among the leaders compared to similarly sized states in this category. And so to set 7% growth was even 5% growth is really unreasonable because we're already towards the top end, not only compared to similar sized states, but we pulled it as a whole and we're doing quite well compared to other states as well. So we really wanted to make sure that we were setting achievable measures for 4S1. The last set focuses on post-secondary performance. All of these indicators are what we currently measure for Perkins 5 on the post-secondary level. They are actually the only options available for us from the U.S. Department of Education on the post-secondary side. And so like post-secondary retention replacement, how many of those students are earning a recognized post-secondary credential, and that could be a skill certificate or a degree. And then also the non-traditional program enrollment, similar to what you saw with the secondary. Our indicators here is that you may notice a significant jump in 2P1, which is earned recognized post-secondary credential. After reviewing the actual performance data from the 4 community colleges, they had a significant jump of 45% from 2021-22 to 2022 to 2023. We expressed some concerns that maybe that could be like a blip. We know that we had a lot of short-term programming due to, dislocated workers. We had a lot of programming for short-term credentialing, those type of things. And so we utilized the flexibility within the law to set a target that's just above where our actual performance is. That gives us 1 year to collect data. If we realize that it wasn't a blip and we are going to be consistently high in that area, that's why you see a 15% jump in that piece, because that will get us back to about where we're at right now. If after the first year we realize that the data isn't coming in and it was a 1 year blip, we're allowed by the U.S. Department of Education to make adjustments to targets in 25, 26 and beyond based on new data. So we set the target based on what we have, but by 2P1, by 25, 26, 26, 27, we're right back to where we reported last year. So that 45% was a pretty significant jump. We're excited about the jump, but it is pretty significant compared to all the other data. Also, we kind of, when you look at 3P1, you'll kind of see smaller growth there. And it's the same reason we're, again, among the leaders in this category compared to similar sized states. And so we wanted to make sure that we were making sure we were setting achievable goals at that point in time. A couple things that I want to kind of like point out in terms of the accountability factors, and I kind of mentioned it. We did set some large targets and some large growth targets, but those larger growth targets are really increases within the realm of influence of our CTE directors. And we were setting those targets. We wanted to make sure that CTE directors, had influence over those areas. When you see the smaller growth in academic areas, our CTE directors don't have as large an influence in that piece of their work. It's not necessarily a direct piece of their work. So we really wanted to focus on things that CTE directors can control with their funding, with their decision making, how they create programs. We really wanted to make sure that that was in their focus. We're always improving our data collection, especially as it relates to work-based learning and industry recognized credentials. And so we accounted for that in some of our future growth as we're improving those items. One of the larger areas that we face is in the area of industry recognized credentials. We're always a little wary of vendor push direct credentials or vendor driven. I think Goen could probably speak to that as well, is that they get a lot of requests from vendors to get their credentials on a list, but they aren't necessarily tied to Nevada businesses in terms of what Nevada businesses are requiring or recognizing as part of the hiring process. And so we really want to, over the course of time, really focus in on those industry recognized credentials to ensure that they're credentials. Also making sure that some credentials such as like the CPR and OSHA 10 that are not necessarily the credential that results in hiring are not necessarily the things that we are recognizing in that piece, because it's very easy for a school district to get a couple hundred students to get a CPR credential and call it good, even though for most of those high demand in demand jobs, it's not CPR that's going to get them a job. It's going to be like the CNA credential. It's going to be the next credential above a CPR. And so those are things that we're a little cognizant about. And then the last item that we heard through our stakeholder meetings, and some of it came from business, some of it came from the education institutions, was that some industries and businesses have an industry recognized credential of their own, but they do not go through the process through Goen to get it recognized. The one thing that we heard quite frequently was actually in the automotive technology programs, where like Ford has their Ford service technician, Subaru has their service technician. I think they all have their own service technician, and because they're doing it internally, there's not necessarily incentive for them to have it recognized by Goen. And so that's one of the things that we've kind of really got to, as we think about the future, how do we help support our students who are potentially earning those credentials in high school and in post-secondary, get those credentials recognized, because we really do tie that to the Goen list significantly. And as much as I really wish I was done with the revision process, I know that I'm not. So we have some next steps. Our subrecipients were already working on their comprehensive local needs assessment, or their CLNA. They started that back in August, as we were also writing revisions to the state plan. So we couldn't make modifications to that CLNA until our revised state plan has been approved by the U.S. Department of Education. So we know we're going to have to make some adjustments to that comprehensive local needs assessment. One of the things that we heard from our stakeholders is we went out and we met with districts while they were doing the CNI. We were in the same meetings with them, is that they really wanted to find a way to have a combined approach for shared data. And I think Western Nevada College, and I don't know if anybody from Western Nevada College is represented in this group, but Western Nevada College did some great partnerships with their secondary school districts. And so instead of having 5 events, one for each school district and one for Western Nevada, they were able to combine them into 1 or 2 events and be able to get all those stakeholders together at once. And so that everybody was getting the same information, sharing the same data, getting the same understanding of workforce needs. And so we really want to design our next comprehensive local needs assessment to be more of a collaborative piece that's regionally focused and not necessarily focused on what an individual institution or a school district is doing. And so that will come, we actually need to do that prior to May 2025, so that school districts can get it in August of 2025, so they can start their comprehensive local needs assessment. And then also prior to fiscal year 27, we have currently 5 school districts and 3 charter schools that are going to need to work in a consortium model to be eligible for funding in FY27. They were initially provided a waiver for that $15,000 because they received less than $15,000, so we were funding them below that level. But Perkins 5 requires them to be over $15,000, and in conversations with those districts, they realized that they were spending more money doing the paperwork, the comprehensive local needs assessment, and everything else, and they weren't actually, they were losing money. And so the regional approach, we're hoping, keeps those districts in the fold and also helps improve alignment with our workforce colleagues and also our post-secondary institutions. So we're going to be spending the next few years helping kind of facilitate those discussions and seeing what models will work. We've seen some models in other states, Colorado, South Dakota, Iowa, South Carolina, that we're looking at in terms of that consortium model and different ways that they work in those type of things. And so we believe we have some willing partners to work in a consortium model. We just need to help facilitate that over the next couple of years. And with that, Madam Chair and the committee, I am available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Statuki? I see David Schmidt.
Yep, thank you, and I'll put my hand down before I forget. I had one question about the 3rd goal that you had, and specifically the working with with go in and go it on the the in-demand occupations and high skill, high wage jobs and industries. And just wanted to think, because I know behind the scenes with the go ed ranking for in-demand jobs, there's some considerations that affect things like, is it does it involve STEM skills, or does it have a degree? Like, I think there's some educational components behind the scenes that affect the ranking of occupations. And since this is talking about CTE, I was wondering if you had taken a look at that list to see if it was filtering out potential high skill or like skilled high wage occupations that might not have that STEM or education component, to make sure that we are getting, you know, things that might be most applicable to CTE. Because I know from our data, when we do the projections, you can look at it a lot of different ways. There's the, like, you know, where will we have lots of openings, and where will we have the types of really specific openings that we think will help move our economic diversification forward. And those sometimes are aligned and sometimes aren't. So that was a lot of words thrown at you, but
No problem. Thank you for the question. Craig Satuki, for the record, through you, the chair, to Mr. Smith, Member Smith. I think the definition kind of helps, because we kind of, I won't say sidetracked, but we included both what Go Ed provides and also what Dieter's research analysis provides, as well as kind of that piece. I think the concern on the in-demand piece that we had heard from subrecipients was that essentially Clark County drives statewide demand. And so one of the things that when we provided reports to our school districts and our community colleges was that Go Ed had done a great job of providing it regionally. And so we're providing a little bit of flexibility on the region aspect. As we think about career pathways going forward, I don't want to say it's easy, because nothing's ever easy in education or workforce, but as Dieter and Go Ed start seeing changes in demand and occupations, it's easier for us to potentially shift programs of study towards that, and not necessarily say, let's say, for example, let's say welding is in demand today, but for some reason tomorrow it's not. We're not dropping welding programs. We're looking at kind of like that rolling piece, because we know things are cyclical over the course of time, but really looking at those new opportunities, especially as we are kind of like, as we've restructured our CT programs, it really has provided a lot more flexibility for districts to kind of do things in years 3 and 4 that are really specific. Like, for example, in construction, we have some teachers who, like, their former jobs were masons and they'd love to teach masonry. Well, I really don't want it. I can't really build a statewide masonry program, but I can provide flexibility for that district to offer, you know, masonry for that teacher that can really help those students in that community in that particular area. And so that was one of the things that we really kind of looked at, was how do we provide districts with more flexibility to kind of shift as their needs, and not necessarily have to wait for the department necessarily to revise standards or build whole new pathways. Hope that answered your question. I also used a lot of words to potentially answer your question.
that was good. Thank you.
Okay, Nancy Olson for the record, and I do see Brett Miller's hand. Brett, just one quick thing before you ask your question. I did want to mention that based on public comments submitted by Mr. Statuki, which, him being my boss, had no influence, we did include in the WIOA state plan the same definitions of in-demand, high wage, etc. So if you did not read through the entire state plan prior to it being passed from the Governor's Workforce Board, it was in there included. So with that, I will then call Brett Miller.
Brett Miller for the record. So, Mr. Statuki, I think I have 2 questions. I think they're probably straightforward. So I think I recall that the funding was somewhere around $12.8 million for CTE. What roughly is the breakout between secondary and post-secondary programs on that?
Thank you for the question, Craig Satuki, for the record, through you, Chair, to Member Miller. On the allocation side, it's 63 secondary, 37 post-secondary. compared to other states as a whole, we're probably a little higher on the post-secondary side than other states. And it was prior to Perkins 5, that percent for post-secondary was lower. I can't tell you what that percent was because that was before my arrival at the department. I'll also point out that outside of the federal funding, we are allocated a little over $13 million each year, the biennium, from the legislature for state secondary CTE funds.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. And then my second question is with respect to secondary placement. It was roughly, I think, about 65%, which seems to be pretty good. Do you have an idea of what the mix is between individuals that are placement in post-secondary education versus the individuals that are going into the workforce?
Craig Suzuki for the record, through you, Chair to Member Miller. I don't have the breakdowns. That's something I can go back to the team with to see if we have. The way that we kind of utilize post-program placement is as Empower is becoming more powerful over the course of time, it's getting easier for us to match. But we also report that based on surveys that the secondary subrecipients send out to their students upon graduation. And so some of that data is survey data. And I'm sure everybody in this call knows that survey data is as good. I see David laughing. Everybody knows that survey data is only as good as the people who fill out the survey. So what we are finding is we're really using that survey data, but we're starting to match a little bit more to Empower. And so it's getting a lot easier for us to get better data on that. But that's something that we can look into for you and the members of the committee. The other part is that in that post-program placement also includes students who indicate that they joined the military, and that's data that we can only currently get through surveys. No state has an agreement with the Department of Defense on, matching data. We'll put that on Katie's list for Empower. But so that's part of that placement is the military piece. But we're getting much better at our data improvement, and we're really appreciative of going with Empower because we're really now utilizing essentially a two-step verification on the surveys. Like we'll have students who will report back to us in survey that they attended an NC institution, and we're able to pull it up through Empower to verify that, plus also through the NC dashboard through NC, and then the workforce. Some of those items we're able to pull through Empower to verify that information as well.
Thank you.
Nancy Olson, for the record, I see David Schmidt's hand. Before David, can I ask a quick question? Craig, if you had out-of-state, interstate data for employment, would you be able to report that under Perkins?
This is Craig Suzuki, the record, Madam Chair. That's something we have to look into. That's something we recently got a request from the U.S. Department of Education about whether or not we were using an interstate agreement to track that. To my knowledge, one, we are not. I'm not sure if other states are doing that across the board yet or not. But if that was an option, we would be able to potentially do that. I think that would be a further conversation amongst stakeholders, legislators, and the governor's office in terms of do we want to track program placement for students who are leaving the state, or do we want to find ways to track it separately? Here's our post-program placement, but here's our in-state post-program placement versus an out-of-state. Because obviously we're spending federal money designated for Nevada and state money designated for Nevada that we want, ideally in the perfect world, that number is 100% because they all stay here. And so I think if we were to do that, we would probably want to find ways to differentiate that data so that we could know who's staying in Nevada and who's leaving. But that also might be helpful information for us as well.
Nancy Olson, for the record, just make a quick note to talk with me further about Swiss. If you want to do that, that would be the method. And with that, I will call on David Schmidt again.
Thank you. And I will say David Schmidt for the record, because I forgot last time. Kind of a question you might not be able to answer. But is there some labor market, population, other types of data that if you had it, you feel you could do more in terms of targeting, in terms of services, like trying to think like, are there gaps as you were putting together this plan that maybe we could work on trying to fill for the future?
Thank you for the question, Craig Satuki. For the record, through you, Madam Chair, to Member Schmidt. I think if there's, I'm not just going to say there's gaps in the data. I think the gaps, particularly with our rural school districts, is really making the connections with the local workforce development board. As we are looking at the comprehensive local needs assessment, our rural school districts really struggle with that piece of the stakeholder engagement, whether it's they don't know who to contact. In some cases, particularly in our rural school districts, the CTE director may be a teacher in the classroom. I think we have one CTE director who is the principal, the bus mechanic. He teaches ag mechanics, and he's also the CTE director. And so one of the things that, like, as we were going, like the regional approach, like how do we help support a school district like that where somebody's already wearing like 6 hats, and then for them to sit there and go, oh, now I have to figure out who my local workforce member is so I can engage them in this part of the process, is very difficult for them. And so we kind of saw it a little bit in when districts turned in their when they turned in their comprehensive local needs assessments in January 2022. So I guess that'd be FY23. We kind of saw it there. We really kind of helped them like connect with Goin in terms of like, and also like, hey, like here's the governor's workforce development board. Like here's the list of like people, like we tried to provide that to districts. As we were reviewing their current comprehensive local needs assessment, we can see that they're still struggling a little bit. It's not as bad as what we saw 2 years ago, but there's still just, I think, the inability of our smaller districts to really do that comprehensive local needs assessment. It's very difficult for them. Like when you're talking like Lander and Pershing, those things are things that they really kind of struggle with, and also why some of them on their own probably don't mind opting out of, like getting like $6,000 in Perkins funding because they're paying their staff way more than $6,000 to manage that. So those are things that we're always looking at. So I don't know if there's disconnects in the data. I think there's disconnects in terms of school districts understanding the data necessarily. They're primarily educators by trade, or actually, technically speaking, they were probably trades first, and now they've become educators. That's the majority of our CTE teachers. But like really kind of like making that connection to the workforce thing. I think every year we read a comprehensive local needs assessment, and there's always a surprise where a school will sit there and say, oh, I thought culinary was going to be higher on the in-demand list than it actually is, because they hear about all the culinary jobs, and like when you start looking at it, like the manufacturing, IT, healthcare jobs are overtaking it. And so I think those are conversations that I think our educators don't necessarily understand yet. And so I think some of it's going to be professional development on our part as an agency, but also working with other agencies to kind of really help kind of facilitate those things. And we've done those things in the past through some CTE conferences. And I think those are opportunities for us to really help teachers connect with those pieces.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy Olson for the record. Do we have any additional questions or discussion for Mr. Statuki? All right, I want to take this opportunity to thank, I feel so weird calling you Mr. Statuki, so, but I want to thank you for presenting to the group. We very much appreciate it, and very informative. Okay, and with
Thank
that,
you.
thank you. With that, I will move on to agenda item number 9 for discussion and information only. The chair would ask if there's any new business from subcommittee members before adjourning. Okay, if I may, Dr. Tyler Garner, I see your hand.
Thank you. And I don't want to drag the meeting on, especially be the person that's holding it up after you mentioned adjournment. But one thing I would love to hear a little more about in the future is if we had the opportunity to look at other factors that may be related to the work. Are there other things that we should be exploring that maybe we just don't have the support to do? Or are there factors that are consistently impact the work that the system just isn't structured to account for? And so I'm thinking about the anomaly that he indicated where we have a year to review and determine what is happening there, and suspect that as the education policy evolves or the implementation of it evolves in different districts. One thing I'm thinking about is recent shifts around work-based learning in one particular district here, that there may be other drivers in the work that we aren't able to account for. And over time, could we get to a place where beyond just hitting the federal measures and reporting out on those, is there a way that we can further contextualize the work and why in ways that would allow us to be even more impactful for communities or seekers in the system?
Thank you. Nancy Olson for the record. And I do see that Katie is taking notes, so we'll keep track of that. I do have one piece of new business that I would like to mention. There is a group of us that participated in a project called Aligned Case Management. It was representative of the different titles as well as TANF from the Department of Work, Welfare and Supportive Services. And it has to do largely with common intake and referral process. We are meeting, we have two different groups that are meeting for the referral process and common intake. They will then combine as we move a little further on. And Janice Klein has been the lead on this. And I would like to maybe schedule in our next meeting a presentation from the progress with that group. Janice, if I can put you on the spot, are you willing or you know, have someone else, if you're not able to present on that in the next meeting, which is quarterly?
Yeah, we can do that, Nancy.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I think there's some great work that's being done. We're making progress in a couple of different areas, and so we don't want that progress to slow in any way. I think it will feed right into the implementation of the strategic plan that is being worked on. So, yeah, there's several things that overlap. And so I think the next meeting will be good timing for that. Okay. Any final questions or discussion? Okay, before moving on, I would kindly request that any member of the subcommittee who arrived late after roll call, please identify yourself at this time so you are marked present.
Senator Lang.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 10. Members of the public are invited for final comments. Are there any final comments on the telephone? Any comments on Zoom? Okay, hearing none, I hereby move to adjourn this meeting. An hour early. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Thank you, Nancy.